Hi, I'm Mike McCoy. I'm the Executive Director of the Strategic Growth Council. And on behalf of the Strategic Growth Council and its member agencies and their constituent departments, I'd like to thank you very much for coming today. We really need your help, your information, your ideas in forming this new and exciting program that the legislature has given to us. What we're going to cover today is the law itself that created this program in a little bit of depth, and then a few proposed program ideas. And they're just conversation starters. These are not things we're wed to, but we want to seed the conversation with some concepts. And then most of all, we want to hear your ideas about the program and how it can best benefit your communities. So with that, I'm going to give it back to Jeff, and we'll get the day started. I don't need 5 minutes.
Thanks. I'm Jeff Lux, and I'm just going to kind of help keep the meeting going, kind of facilitate. We've got a lot of assistance from OPR and from HCD and from Caltrans also helping with this. Let me just go over really quickly kind of the logistical part of this and kind of the agenda, how it goes, and so you'll get a sense of, we're here till 4, and we have basically 3 pieces. The first will be a series of presentations, or a presentation with some different presenters. We'll have a chance for a few questions at that point, but you'll probably have a lot of questions, and a lot of very detailed and in-depth questions. We're going to hold most of those because we're going to spend literally the next 2 hours being able to give and take and talk and give ideas and ask and answer questions in small groups. So we'll do a few clarifying questions after the presentations, but then I'm going to kind of cut that off and say, okay, let's get into our small groups and really get into some detail. And I should mention this is being webcast, so hopefully there's some people who are seeing this and hearing this at their computers, and we won't be able to take their questions live just because of the logistics, but those questions and comments can be emailed in. And I know there's a number of places where the email address is noted. So this can be emailed in, it'll be answered or dealt with after the meeting. So at about 1:50 or so, we'll go into the first breakout. And we're going to basically have 2 50-minute breakout sessions. And the first one, and we'll be in this room, so we'll kind of just basically be dividing up into the corners of the room. You'll have a facilitator and you'll have a note taker at each breakout. The first breakout, all the breakout groups are the same. You're essentially dealing with the same issues, asking the same questions, answering the same questions. And for those of you who got these materials, you'll be able to see what the first breakout is all about. The easiest way is on this sheet here, this one here that has the little comment box at the bottom. It's called Interdisciplinary Breakout Group. And basically it asks kind of 3 broad questions about the kinds of programs and activities that best meet the goals and intentions of the program, and you'll see that during the presentation, and then a little bit about unintended consequences, and then consistency with sustainable community strategies. So that's the general nature of that. I call that kind of the content conversation, if you will, and we'll have a chance. So whatever breakout group you end up with during that 50-minute time period, it's going to be the same conversation. And they'll be recording everything you say and your ideas and your questions and all that on note takers. The second breakout, we'll also do 5 of them. We've got 5. We'll have 5 stations around the room. But they each have a little different take, a little different focus. And so you'll kind of pick the focus that's most interesting to you. And one focus will be on eligible projects, what should be eligible projects, and how to think about them in terms of size and scale and that sort of thing. The second on program criteria, the criteria the program should be using to set priorities and make decisions. The third on non-metropolitan areas, so how to make sure that the rural areas get a chance at this as well. The fourth on disadvantaged communities and kind of what that means and how to best direct resources in that sense. And then the fifth on affordable housing. And we'll show you, when we get to that time period, we'll show you where each group is. But you'll have the chance to bounce between groups. You can bounce as much as you want. I'll do a formal bounce every 15 minutes or so. I'll say, okay, if anybody wants to switch groups right now, is a great time to do it, and I'll ring my little bell. And that way you'll be able to go and actually have touch with pretty much any of those topic areas. And so again, you'll have a chance to weigh in on all those issues as you choose to do so. And then we'll do a quick wrap-up, and that's the end of our agenda. The last thing I want to do is just, I think everybody, this is not a conflict resolution kind of meeting, so hopefully everyone will sort of treat differences as a strength and be respectful of that. But I put down some just quick kind of get through the meeting easy ground rules up there about cell phones and being concise and trying to let the facilitator kind of run the show for you, and that'll get us through the meeting in a timely way and give everybody a chance to talk and be fair to everybody and all that. So that's kind of the purpose of those. So are there any clarifying questions about what we're here to do? Kind of objectives of the day, the agenda, any of that sort of thing? Okay, on to the presentation. Kate, are you number one up?
Number one.
Okay. This one, or do you want to be behind the podium?
I'd like to be up here. Maybe I can do everything. Move the slides, hold my paper, and speak into the mic. That would be very coordinated. Thank you, everyone, for coming, and welcome again. My name is Kate White, and I am Deputy Secretary at the State Transportation Agency. And I'm a Deputy for Environmental Policy and Housing Coordination, so you can see why I was very interested in how this program evolves. And we really look forward to your input today. We're really at the beginning stages of the budget was just approved July 1st, so we're just figuring out this brand new program and what should be the components, how we should think about it, and once again, really look forward to your input and thoughts today. So with that, I am going to get started here. This is the first of two series of workshops. This week, we're also going to be, as you can see on the screen, in Oakland and Los Angeles. And this is really some preliminary workshops to get a bunch of different ideas about what this program should be about, where we should focus. And then another round of workshops in the fall is going to focus specifically on the guidelines. Draft guidelines will be out in the fall, and so you'll be able to comment and give input on that actual guidelines. But we're pretty early in the process here. So next slide. If those of you who are joining us via webcast, welcome as well. And I believe this will be posted, this webcast will be posted on the SGC website. And as Jeff mentioned, if you have questions, if you're listening in and you want to email questions or comments on the program, you can send it to this address, AHSC, so Affordable Housing Sustainable Communities, ahsc@sgc.ca.gov. So that is the standing by email address for comments and questions. So in terms of the goals for today's workshop, you will hear about, first, some of the existing laws and mandates, what we have to follow per the laws that are in place surrounding this program. More about the timeline and the concurrent processes that are going on that are going to be shaping this program. You're going to hear about some proposed initial program concepts. And then, of course, the main goal for these workshops is really gathering input for the program guidelines. So next slide. I'm going to talk about the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund investments, which is where the money came from. This slide is actually a really good summary of this year's budget. The full $832 million that was budgeted for out of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, which is funding from our state cap and trade program. So basically, any industries that are coming under the cap basically have to go into a pool and pay for the carbon that they are emitting. And then our job is to take that money into these various programs and figure out how to reverse the trend and reduce GHG, greenhouse gas emissions. And so you'll see that there's a bunch of programs going on that are in development or continuing existing strong programs that are effective in reducing GHG or greenhouse gas emissions. And the first whole light blue section on the screen there is the sustainable communities and clean transportation programs that are evolving. The darker blue is energy efficiency, clean energy, and the final green one there is natural resources and waste diversion. So all these programs are being developed right now. Our focus for today is really in the top blue, the italicized, the Strategic Growth Council's Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities Program, which was budgeted this year at $130 million. So our job today is starting to shape that program and where we think that particular $130 million should go. There's in that light blue bucket, you can see there's a number of other transportation and sustainable communities programs being developed, the high-speed rail, transit operations, transit capital, and the Air Resources Board has a low emissions transportation program. So those are all happening as well, but ours is today is the Strategic Growth Council's Affordable Housing Sustainable Communities, so the $130 million. So where did this, if you go to the next slide, some of the key laws that we are shaping this program, going back to 2006, of course, probably everyone in this room has heard a lot about AB 32, the California Global Warming Solutions Act, which Governor Schwarzenegger signed in 2006, and that's a pretty aggressive timeline for us to really try to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, which is one of the leading causes of climate change. So, and then in 2008, we had SB 375, which is the Sustainable Communities and Climate Protection Act, which required, and I'm sure many of you in this room were involved with the Fresno effort, Sustainable Community Strategy, but every region in the state has had to come up with some kind of sustainable community strategy, and that's really linking our land use and transportation planning and investments for the first time, really linking those land use and transportation so it's not so siloed. And in 2012, we had SB 535, which was a bill that requires the auction proceeds, so any money that's coming out of this cap and trade needs to benefit and be invested in disadvantaged communities, and we're going to talk a little bit more about how disadvantaged communities is being defined in the state. And then in 2012, there were a couple different laws, AB 1532 and then also SB 1018. And both of those basically set up the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund and told us how to structure this public process, how to make sure that all the funding goes towards reducing greenhouse gas emissions and other co-benefits. And then finally, just this year, the budget bill was SB 862. So if you want to see, look that up, you can see exactly what we need to work within in terms of the budget bill. But that created the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities Program, along with all those other programs I mentioned a moment ago. And so that's a little of the context. And then in terms of the structure of this particular program, I wanted to walk through this slide. I think it's helpful visual of what does this all mean and how is it working. The Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, I've been talking about that. That's where the money comes from. And the Air Resources Board really has ultimate control over that money. And of course, their mandate is to make sure that we're reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And they have, in addition to that primary GHG reduction results, there's other co-benefits that we will be talking about today, as well as the disadvantaged communities requirement, which I mentioned as well. So those three bubbles are what the Air Resources Board is developing guidance around and requiring of all their programs out of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. And so our piece of it here today is the Strategic Growth Council's piece. And is everyone familiar with Strategic Growth Council? Did anybody not know what it is? Okay, good. So Strategic Growth Council, my boss, the secretary, sits on it. Six secretaries meet every couple months and really try to look at the growth in the state and how we can invest strategically, and sustainably. So the Strategic Growth Council has two sub-programs coming out of this $130 million. One is going to be a small program on agricultural land protection, and the other much larger program, which really is the focus today, is the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities program. And as you can see in the blue boxes, the Natural Resources Agency is going to administer the ag land protection, and the Department of Housing and Community Development is going to help administer the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities program. So we're really trying to tap into the expertise that we have in different departments to help manage this. So let's see, evolution of state support for sustainable communities. This next slide, I think, is a nice illustration of the evolution and the long history that the state of California has on cross-sector and cross-departmental collaboration to advance sustainable communities. And starting with research and best practices, going on to planning and a bunch of different planning programs, project implementation, leading us to today. And so a couple things to highlight on planning. The Regional Blueprint Program under planning was back in 2004, 2005, and that was before SB 375 and the Sustainable Community Strategies were required. That was a program that Caltrans started that gave grants to regional entities to integrate their transportation and land use plans, and I believe that the Central Valley counties got a blueprint grant back then to get started on regional planning, transportation and land use planning. Another thing to highlight on here in terms of some successful programs is right in the middle under project implementation, the TOD and infill infrastructure program, that's transit-oriented development and infill infrastructure, which has given several $100 million to different transit-oriented developments around the state and through the Housing and Community Development Department. And another couple things to just highlight on here on the left, on the bottom, the Sustainable Communities Planning Program, and all the way to the right on the bottom, the Urban Greening Program. Those are two programs that the Strategic Growth Council has been running for the last 4 years and has given out about $130 million to local cities and regions for planning and for urban greening. So it's a really exciting moment, just to take a pause, I think in the evolution of these programs, this type of thinking, how we need to grow as a state, and what's great is I think we're building on a lot of lessons learned here from all these different programs and best practices, and seeing what of all these different programs can we pull together to launch this program, this Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities program. So with that, I am going to hand it over to Allison Joe, who's the Deputy Director at the Strategic Growth Council, to keep going.
Thank you. I'm going to try this model. I'm going to stand behind but still be facing the audience but not behind the dais, so we'll see how that works. And control the slides. So thank you, Kate, for that overview. What I'm going to go through right now is actually the bulk of what this workshop is not going to be covering. As you noticed, I'm going to actually flip back to that slide, which is complex in terms of the nature of the greenhouse gas fund, greenhouse gas reduction fund, as well as the organizations involved. Primarily what I wanted to talk about was the relationship between the requirements for greenhouse gas emissions reductions and how that plays in with the ARB guidance. So I'm going to click back to that other slide. First of all, you've noticed ARB has been pretty active lately, and all of the programs under the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund and related cap and trade auction proceeds have really been active in trying to get out guidance to really implement these programs that were just approved in the last budget. What we're looking at here are several things from ARB. One is the expenditure record to ensure that the investments further the goals and objectives of AB 32. That information is now in interim form is published on the ARB website. The other thing is that SB 535, as Kate mentioned, the direction related to disadvantaged communities and how our programs should consider and think about benefits to those disadvantaged communities. Those requirements to maximize those benefits and guidance for that draft guidance should be out later this week. Again, released by ARB. If you guys are following this, which I think you all are, this should be out by the end of this week. Finally, another big question is how do we measure the greenhouse gas reductions? If you're applying for funds, how do we go about doing that? ARB is responsible for developing those methodologies, and SGC has been working with them to do that. And then finally, project tracking and reporting. So those last two bullets are really intended to be developed by ARB over the course of the next year. We will be working with them pretty closely and hope to keep you updated as that goes along. I wanted to cover very briefly what the disadvantaged communities guidance would look like and the purpose. You may have noticed out front there were some handouts related to ARB's and Cali PA's workshops next week and the following week. So they are going to, those workshops, the purpose of those are to develop guidance to state programs that discuss and help those state programs maximize benefits to DACs and determine whether an investment provides a benefit to or is located within a disadvantaged community. So that was always been a question as we've talked through SB 535. How do we figure this out? This is the guidance that will help us, state agencies, us, figure that out. The time frame for that is really this fall, and it's really public workshops, as I mentioned, August 20th here in Oakland, August 25th in Fresno, and August 26th in Los Angeles. The first phase of guidance is expected in September and will be presented to the Air Resources Board on September 18th. Did I keep clicking? Hey, yeah. So then the second part is on the GHG reductions. The other question is the purpose for developing consistent methodologies for all of the state agencies providing programs. And thinking about that process, that is actually much later on as programs ramp up. Clearly, the SGC programs are ahead of this particular game. At this point, we are working very closely with ARB and their staff to ensure that there's alignment of methodologies, that we are working in sync, that ultimately our work with their guidance informs their future guidance over the course of the year. It's a little bit of a coordination effort. We're really pleased to be working with ARB and have their expertise in thinking through this. But this should be working through the middle of next year. I also wanted to talk about something else that I think there's been a lot of interest in, but we have been really thinking about how to handle these topics within the context of the larger program. The agricultural lands conservation and protection component, we are looking at this a little bit separately. As you noticed in the diagram, this program is intended to be administered by the Natural Resources Agency. We have specifically the purpose of it is the acquisition of easements or other approaches or tools that protect agricultural lands that are under pressure being converted to non-agricultural uses, particularly those adjacent to areas most at risk of urban or suburban sprawl or those of special environmental significance. So there's some very specific direction that we've received through the statute to support that. At this point, the Resources Agency is developing a separate process for comments, but primarily if you have questions or additional comments on how this program would be intended to be implemented, there's a separate email address for that. notably the tail end, it's the ag component of it. The other thing that we wanted to also make sure that you considered is in the overall Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities program that we actually think about how protection of agricultural lands is relevant to the larger picture. If we aren't intending to use to think of this as a siloed effort, although there's a specific component specifically for protection of ag lands. However, we think that in the main program that this is in a holistic view we would consider in supporting sustainable communities that protection of ag lands is a component of that. So we are thinking about how to best integrate that as a component of the larger program, as well as looking at this individually. I'm going to go a little bit into the program overview, just a couple of the details on how this is set up, the statutory requirements, which I think most of you are familiar with. If you haven't heard it enough, if we don't emphasize this enough, the primary, one of the statutory requirements and threshold requirements would be to demonstrate greenhouse gas emissions reductions. Consistency with the state planning priorities, which are really effectively to make efficient use, so to develop in infill areas, to protect natural resources, and to be efficient if you do have to build in greenfield areas. Their implementation of the regional sustainable communities, the regional sustainable community strategy is also really important to us. We feel like this is, again, a continuation of SB 375 and some of our SGC work in planning. If we plan for it correctly, then in theory there should be the next step is implementation, and that's what we're looking for in this program. Of note, also in terms of the funding and how that is distributed, 50% of the funding is to be invested to benefit disadvantaged communities. As you know, all the ARB guidance will certainly help us. And then, in addition, 50% of the funding would be is to provide housing opportunities for lower income communities. Not necessarily, they can overlap, so you can have a disadvantaged community and affordable housing, and there are opportunities for non-disadvantaged communities that are not housing. So don't think of it as 100% in that sense, but there's a significant amount of investment, and we're really excited about that. Again, projects will demonstrate how they support the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by increasing the accessibility of housing, employment centers, and key destinations via low carbon transportation options, and resulting in fewer vehicle miles traveled. So also the program's intent is really to provide grants and affordable housing loans for infill and compact development, transit-oriented development, and infrastructure activities. I'm going to go over the eligible uses, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about how those uses apply in that particular context. Fairly straightforward. The Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities program looks at eligible uses in terms of affordable housing, transit, active transportation, so capital projects, non-infrastructure active transportation, complete streets, which can also reflect capital improvements, transit-oriented development, other greenhouse gas and criteria air pollutant reduction efforts, as well as sustainable community strategies implementation plans. So this is a lot to cover. So this is basically everything from the plans to develop the projects to the actual implementation of the projects through active transportation, through other transit-oriented development efforts, other programmatic efforts. What we're primarily focusing on is that the eligible uses would be assisted through loans and grants for affordable housing and grants for other activities. So in terms of how you think about what and how we would fund, this is a good example of that. I'm going to turn it over to Linda Wheaton with Housing and Community Development. Oops, you're going to do that.
Who's this? Hello, everyone. I'm Linda Wheaton, the Assistant Director for Intergovernmental Affairs at the Department of Housing and Community Development, or HCD. And the statute basically authorized leveraging expertise of existing programs. And as you saw, as Kate went through some of our history on this, we have for some time been moving toward the integration of land use and transportation. So we're working here to implement the greenhouse gas reduction objectives of AB 32, largely via the transportation sector, which focuses on the integration. So we don't have these, we're not funding these individual uses in isolation, but working on their integration to achieve multiple objectives. So in particular, we're working to achieve reduction of vehicle miles traveled, fewer single occupancy vehicles. And so how we go about getting there is by increasing mode shift from travel, from reducing the single occupancy vehicle use and increasing our travel options, all the way from rail to active transportation, bike and walking in particular. So we've seen a big uptick in support for these activities recently, and this program hopes to leverage that activity. In particular, a challenge is to make this work, we have to work at accessing key destinations so people can get to work and to the services and recreational opportunities and needs they have through choices, a variety of ways, so that we can then achieve a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. So that is the overriding requirement for this program. Every project is going to have to meet a GHG reduction objective according to metrics as defined by the Air Resources Board. In addition, many of the projects will achieve secondary or ancillary kinds of GHG reduction benefits. For example, energy efficiency is a big area where GHG reduction can be achieved. GHG sequestration in urban forestry, for example, and other kinds of means of reduction or avoidance of GHG. So they must, as she indicated in October and going into 2015, there will be guidelines for the metrics for this. So right now we're starting with some proposed project typologies or concepts for different ways in which eligible uses might be combined, projects put together and integrated to achieve these objectives. And this is part of what we're looking for some feedback on and your ideas about today. So we've proposed 3 primary types of categories, and you may have another as well. So one of those, for example, is taking our transit-oriented development concept. We've been working at that for some time, but it's been largely focused at a single development project or station area. So we're looking at this case with something that would expand the geographic scope and scale of transit-oriented development as one type of opportunity, especially in highly urbanized areas with high-quality transit. Another is we know that infill affordable housing can also support GHG reduction based also upon locational attributes and in concert with other eligible supporting uses that support reducing single occupancy vehicle use. And then there's another category we're proposing for active transportation or non-housing projects that would work in combination and probably at significant enough scale to also achieve GHG reduction through activities like complete streets, bike ped access, infrastructure kind of improvements, serving mixed use accessibility that wouldn't necessarily have to have affordable housing. And as I indicated, you may have other ideas. So the ancillary or secondary benefits of energy efficiency or pollutant reduction and GHG sequestration might occur then in these kinds of projects as well. So this, just for example, when I talked about a larger scale TOD beyond an immediate development area, there might be more of a corridor focus or a transit-oriented development district or neighborhood. In addition to the GHG, or I should perhaps say along with the GHG reduction and the benefits to disadvantaged communities, the statute also requires, and we've been working at for some time, co-benefits for these kinds of activities. And there are a number of these. One of the most important are economic benefits and considerations. So access to employment centers, workforce training, the kind of economic benefits and public health benefits are absolutely critical. Improving air quality is key, is part and parcel of this. Many of our land use strategies have certainly been designed with that objectives, and I think you're well aware of those efforts here in the Valley. And as I indicated, reducing energy consumption, water consumption activities can be, of course, also very influential here, and reducing the greenfield land consumption, where we hope to incentivize ag protection along with these activities. So overall, many of these objectives of reducing GHG reduction, serving disadvantaged communities, providing affordable housing, are mutually beneficial. They by definition protect public health and serve these other objectives. So one of the key functions of this program is to be an implementation tool for the sustainable community strategies that have been formally adopted within regional transportation plans or regional plans that aren't required to do so, similar plans at the local and the regional level that promote these objectives and development in a more sustainable way. So the MPOs and the regional transportation agencies play a key role in this, and that's one of the things we're also looking for some feedback on relative to that, what that might be. So that is kind of a big overview of the input that we're seeking on the program, and that you'll have an opportunity to give us some feedback on today. Thank you. Jeff?
I think there's a hidden slide on there. There's one
something?
more slide I think that I wanted to go through really quickly.
Sorry.
So that's all right. So what we wanted to do is also, so today we're here and we're looking at the first of 3 public workshops. We're excited to start those off. So we're checking that one off for right now. Maybe a little early, but I think we're going to do it. September, so next month, the SGC will post on its website, per statute, draft guidelines. In October, we should have 3 public workshops specifically on the draft guidelines. So you'll have something to respond to, provide comment on. Again, thinking about how we go through this process. This today is to basically get your ideas, thoughts about what kind of projects you have on the ground, how do we address certain challenges, and really interesting ways to think about this program. The guidelines document will really put those thoughts and consider those thoughts as well as the statute. November of this year, we will release draft final guidelines for the Strategic Growth Council's actual adoption and approval. Approval, then adoption. In December, they will be presented to the council. That council meeting is December 11th. In January of next year, we will release a funding solicitation. In April, we have applications due, and in June, the awards will be announced and presented to the council for approval. So we have a pretty fast timeline. We are excited about doing this, so that, I mean, in some ways, this is a great opportunity to get your ideas. And so with that, I think that's the last of, at least this is the update in terms of where we go next. With that, I'm going to hand it back to Jeff.
Okay, thanks. So we've got a couple minutes now for just some clarifying questions, and as I say, we're going to have 2 50-plus minute sessions where you can really get into detail, both questions and also comments, ideas, suggestions. But let's get a couple clarifying questions, and it can be for any of our 3 speakers. We'll try to figure out who's best.
We're going to, because we're webcasting, we're going to have you speak into the mic and actually introduce yourself.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Mark Wall with Lake Transit Authority in Lake County, California. And I'm also here on behalf of the California Association for Coordinated Transportation. Our legislative chair would have liked to have attended a workshop today, but apparently many of the workshops, or at least the ones in Southern California and Northern California, had waiting lists and people weren't able to attend. And so I'm just wanting to comment that on that first step up there for August 2014, I think there are probably a number of people that are frustrated that would like to have input into the process that have not been able to.
Okay, thank you.
Tina Sumner, City of Clovis. I just have a question about the term disadvantaged communities, and I'm not sure who would be appropriate to answer that, but when you talk about disadvantaged communities, are you talking about places on a map, or are you talking about groups of people?
I can take that. I'm not sure where cameras might be, so I'm going to face the audience. Speak to the people that are here and at home. So in terms of disadvantaged communities, SB 535 and the other related legislation specifically says that for the cap and trade auction proceeds programs, that the California Environmental Protection Agency will develop a tool to determine the disadvantaged communities. So that tool, as you may be familiar with, is called California EnviroScreen. It's in its 2.0 version and is a fairly dynamic tool. What that tool does is it produces a map, to answer your first question, which represents communities and people who are affected by a number of both demographic and environmental conditions, and that is the metric or the means by which we will determine that 50% requirement in our program.
Hi, I'm Claire Fleisler with Santa Cruz Metropolitan Transit District. Going off of that on Cal EnviroScreen 2.0, one of the things that the map shows is if you just take the threshold of the top 10% or top 25% most disadvantaged communities. And do we have a threshold for this program?
Excellent segue. It's really the second part to Tina's question. So the workshops that ARB and Cal EPA are putting on in the next couple of weeks really to address that threshold amount, as well as how do you define benefits. So for the purposes of what we're talking about here, assume that we are affecting disadvantaged communities, but we don't have that answer on threshold at this point. In the back, It's on. It's on.
Hi, thanks. Phoebe Seaton with Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability. Does the reducing the mandatory reducing greenhouse gas emissions by reducing vehicle miles traveled as sort of one aspect of kind of a condition of eligibility, is that statutory, or is that a decision that the council has made to ensure alignment between housing, transportation, and land use?
Linda, do you want to take that one?
Reduction of GHG for by vehicle miles traveled reduction is not statutory. It is, however, probably one of the most common surrogate measures that's used for it, and so consequently, it's our proposal for one of the starting points. You'll see it, I'm sure, you're aware of it in a number of the ARB efforts to implement AB 32.
Any other clarifying questions before we move on? Two. Maybe more.
Jeannie Wardwaller with the Safe Routes to School National Partnership. Just following up again on the disadvantaged communities and kind of who has a role in what part of the definition. I think as the benefit to a particular geographic area is defined, it's slightly different for different types of projects. So I'm just thinking in terms of active transportation, you might potentially have several miles of bike lane that intersects several census tracts. And so I'm curious, will that be something that ARB considers, or will that be to the level that the council will discuss with this program?
The answer to that question is that it will be addressed in the ARB guidance. Yeah.
All right. Jeff Roberts, Granville Homes. Allison, in your presentation, pardon me, in your presentation you talked about eligible uses, and complete streets might be one of those uses that qualify. Is there a recognized state definition of complete street?
So the statute that that creates our program doesn't reference any statutory definition. The state does have programs and definitions related to it, so there's some flexibility. However, we want to keep to the intent of complete streets as much as we possibly can. So that's decent answer.
Why don't we take one more, because we're getting right into the very details and good comments that we're going to be taking the next hour. So,
Brian Fouch, Mariposa County. Is there a sort of a built-in bias in the program toward more urbanized areas as opposed to more rural areas? Rural Mariposa County being very rural.
So to the extent that projects that meet the threshold criteria reflect more are more competitive for urban areas, I think it's a competitiveness a function. I don't think that there's a natural bias, but I think that based on the criteria that have been set in statute, I think there's a competitiveness factor to that. That's right. Yeah.
okay, there'll be hopefully there'll be lots of these kinds of comments, questions, and ideas, and your own observations and opinions in the 2 breakout sessions. Just to remind us, we're going to break into 5 groups. We've got group 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. For group 5, you're just going to have to do your best to kind of cluster around the chairs. While I'm doing this, why don't I invite the facilitator and the note taker to go ahead and go up, because I'm going to just do a very quick count off. You're all spread out, so the count off's going to be a little challenging, but we'll just count off 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in just a second. But we'll let the facilitators get to their stations. Each group's the same in this case. We've got about 50 minutes or so. I'll probably ring the bell somewhere 5 minutes before and kind of get you guys ready. We'll take a little break in between the breakout sessions. And you're dealing with the 3 questions that are on this front sheet that everybody has. One has to do with the kinds of projects and activities that support affordable housing, disadvantaged communities, and GHG emissions. One has to do with unintended consequences. And one has to do with consistency with regional and local goals. But before we count off, let me sign off on the people who are on the webcast. Thanks very much, whoever you are, wherever you are. Thank you, and you've got that email address to send in comments and questions. And we'll probably be signing off the webcast at this point, because now we're going to be breaking up into groups around the room. Okay. All right, we're at our stage. So why don't we do as best we can? Let's see if we can do a count off 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, starting here.